Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are honored to be sitting down with Jordan Finneseth. He's the author of Manual for the Soul, a Beginner's Guide, Awaken Your Enlightenment in Millennium 2.1. He's also an author at Cointelegraph.com. Thank you for joining us, Jordan.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So your focus at Cointelegraph is on the markets, and I want to definitely speak about that, but I also want to go kind of deeper into the topic of your book. You mentioned basically empowering people to be in control of their lives is one of your passions in life. However, here we are. It's September 18th, 2021. We had about a $600 million liquidation by MicroStrategy, which a close friend of mine, founder of BitcoinATM.com, suggested might be for a forthcoming Bitcoin purchase. People seem to generally be feeling bullish. However, like 2 weeks ago, they were feeling bearish. And 2 weeks before that, they might have been feeling bullish. And then 2 weeks before that, they might have been feeling bearish. Basically on and on for probably as long as markets have been around. And this is really like exemplified on Twitter. Man, I have tried to follow the markets like on a daily basis. However, I don't generally do that because there is just, on the topic of having control over your emotions and your thoughts, there's just so much noise out there. But bringing us back today, everyone's feeling real bullish heading into the fourth quarter and the end of the year. I would argue that there might be something to that. For instance, while September has generally been a poor month, according to certain indicators, according to certain sources, historically in Bitcoin, at the same time, there has been this notion in commodities markets of a summer doldrums. And Bitcoin as digital gold, we might see on a long enough timeline, does experience these summer doldrums. For instance, in Europe, people take time off during the summer. Perhaps people with kids at home, perhaps work life with kids at home slows down a bit. And this leads to a decreasing volume in commodities markets. There is just this concept of the summer doldrums, and it very well might be a myth, but it could very well also be a factor of very many factors in the Bitcoin price determination process. That's my like college mind coming out, because when you're in college, it's like the more words, the better. Price determination process. And this is a joke. I'm on one this morning. It's definitely Saturday. So here we are at the end of a potential summer doldrums, heading into what people feel is going to be a very strong Q4. What have you been seeing, especially in the Bitcoin market?
Yeah, Bitcoin's kind of been fluctuating up and down. There's been a lot of coordinated fear, uncertainty, doubt, FUD this whole year, ever since it kind of took off earlier in the year. And I don't know, we might be headed towards a market similar to the one we saw in 2013, where there was a double pump. But we can't really look at any of these markets in isolation. I think a lot of them are being affected by factors going on in the larger world, whether it's central banks printing money, people being locked down, people staying home. Like, if they're staying home with their kids and they can't go out and do as much, they might be more likely to spend some money online or jump into the stock markets or the commodities markets and stuff like that. So I think it's hard to really look at it in isolation, but there's a 4-year cycle in Bitcoin markets. And if you think back, even just the last cycle, 2017, it started heating up really towards the end of the year. And this year has felt a lot like that market, even though it got to a new all-time high above 64,000 earlier in the year and pulled back now. There's a lot of just even social media hype saying that's going to 100,000, it's going to 100,000. A lot of times for me, actually, that's a contrarian thing. I'm like, if everybody's saying something, it might not do that. So like, if I was actually trading the Bitcoin markets, I'd probably put my sell orders in probably starting around 90,000 or even 80,000 and just ladder up from there. That's not investment advice. That's just don't wait for it to go all the way to $100,000. But I do also feel
it's not where it's don't be a follower of the herd.
Yeah,
that's what we're saying here, people.
Yeah, don't be a follower herd, but don't neglect social media and the power of like the herd. Like if you're investing, like I was doing a show with one of my workers, my couple of my co-writers at Cointelegraph a couple of weeks, and one of the writers, and he's told technical analysis only sticks to like Bitcoin, Ethereum, hates the shit coins as he calls them. But even to him at the end, he was like, if everybody starts talking about a coin, just buy a little bit of it because it's going to keep going up because that's what people do. And that's kind of what you've seen a lot in the crypto markets. And you see that, like you're saying, it gets a little crazy on Twitter. Crypto Twitter is insane. And that's the whole NFT market and all that. They really got pumped up, but they get where they go because of social media and stuff like that. But just getting back to the Bitcoin market, there's so many different signals coming in, whether it's TA, whether it's on-chain analysis, whether it's outside news or headline impacts. It's really hard to say this is what we're going to try and correlate it to this market or that market. But in my like long-term perspective on it, we're actually what everybody, all of us here are seeing is the formation of a new asset class. And we've never really, nobody alive saw when the stock market started, saw when like the gold markets really got going, and like, because they've been going on for thousands of years, you know? So this is the first time that people have seen a large scale asset class birth itself into the world. And it's almost like the cycles start off quicker. Like the cycles in the gold commodities market are long, decades long, right? But they probably weren't like that at the beginning. So like the whole crypto market, it's cycling itself into existence. And as time progresses, those cycles get longer, but we're kind of seeing it and we get to experience it more. So cryptos are definitely a lot more volatile. Like you're saying, 1 week it's up, 1 week it's down. And that's all, to me, in 2016, I started studying like Forex trading. And it's all like nothing happens and then everything happens at once. So there's got to be something in that long period of nothing where traders just move the markets, banks move the markets. It's like they give the whole ecosystem of the markets something to do while nothing's really happening. And then all of a sudden something happens and everybody FOMOs in. And they've usually, most people miss the big mark. So we're just kind of seeing that for gold traders or holders, it's probably a little off-putting or intense to experience it in crypto because it is so fast. There's so much emotion behind it. Like gold holders have put so much energy into that gold for so long, and they've just been waiting and waiting for this to see so much action in crypto. It's kind of like, it can be intimidating, or just like, oh, I don't want that. Like, just from a psychological standpoint, we get used to certain amounts of energy or certain experiences. And the crypto is definitely a new one, but it really, the big change in the whole world is the internet. If you like gold is real world hard money. If you acknowledge the fact that the internet's going to be with us until electricity goes away, realize that Bitcoin is just the hard money of the internet. And if you can accept that premise and realize that we live in a duality, and if that duality is the physical world versus the digital world, think of it like the internet is a dimension that we've created. It's a whole dimension that we stare at screens all day long, putting energy into. So it's a world, just as much as we spend 30% of our lives sleeping. Think of how much time we spent putting energy into the internet. There's got to be a money there. Gold doesn't translate well into the internet. So it's just, if you live in the physical world, live in the digital world, hold both, in my opinion. And silver, but
We're like a crude form of Android, in my
yeah.
opinion. We just haven't interfaced with the technology yet. I would argue that we shouldn't interface with this technology until we have control over the progress of technology. However, today already, I think we are like a form of Android. And this is something that I think has to be governed. First, we got to be able to govern ourselves, but in order to govern our relationship with this technology. And I find myself even always being lured into the social media apps. And generally speaking, with every new algorithm update, it seems the content becomes less and less satisfying spiritually, intellectually to me. And therefore, it's like one of the ways in which I'm trying to basically become the master of these apps rather than vice versa is by creating content. So I interact with them by creating content. I delete Instagram, for instance, when I'm not using it to upload stuff. And when I upload stuff, I'll get my kind of like, serotonin hit, but then I try to get rid of it. And now as it relates to the markets, these things are, as you said, things are moving so much quicker because of these social media apps. So we see something like Wall Street Bets, in which perhaps a few traders who understand the fundamentals come up with a thesis or a hypothesis for a trade, and a group of people via Reddit or via social media like Twitter involve themselves into that trade, either to make money or to for a social purpose or for both. And I saw the mainstream press really kind of um, describing that event almost like a physical riot, just in the digital, in the fintech realm. And that is something that will certainly have an effect on markets, and I think could have an effect on markets. And I think that politicians and regulators recognize that, and that it introduces a, a new variable in price discovery. And it's perhaps one that politicians such as Elizabeth Warren are comfortable about for what this or that reason, or at least the special interests who fund her campaigns aren't comfortable with for whatever reasons. Now, I'm curious, Jordan, like what pressures do you see being put on Bitcoin currently to determine future price in, let's say, by the end of the year?
Pressures determine future price. Like
So,
El Salvador's move to accept it as legal tender is, I think, one of the biggest pressures, because I think that was a long-term goal. Like the IMF, the people that run the world, they're not stupid. They see it, but they want to control it. And I think that like El Salvador wasn't on their game plan. Like El Salvador was like, man, we're just gonna jump ahead of you. So they're like, so now they kind of like stuck. They're like, damn it, and they're squash it down. Like the day El Salvador announced it, it tanked. But what happened? Now the market's back up. It's like, because like I try to explain this to people, and a lot of people don't agree, but they're not going to be able to control the Bitcoin market through futures contracts like they have with gold and the COMEX. Like you can't, most people can't get their physical gold in those places. You're gonna what?
however, that certainly is something that I think is a interesting thesis. It seems like that could be a result of the derivatives of Bitcoin on the financial markets, that the supply and demand of physical Bitcoin and what's going on in the financial markets divorce from one another. This has happened in the silver market. So we've got like $23 silver or whatever, but you can't get it for like, you get it for 30 if you're lucky.
Yeah. So
and, however, then I'm interested, like certainly now we can have a discussion about whether this will be an effective approach to controlling the price of Bitcoin. And I think that once we like accept that, yeah, financial markets are used to like perhaps control, nudge commodities markets. And I'm going to put this up on YouTube. So that we can then have an open discussion about whether or not something like that could arise in Bitcoin. However, that notion that a financial market could be used in such a way, a derivative, is like alien to too many people, even the financially savvy. So I'm curious. So tell me more about your like hypothesis on the Bitcoin ETFs and their effect on the Bitcoin price.
Well, the Bitcoin ETFs, I think that like Bitcoin started cypherpunks years ago. Like there's this, then this is getting more in my psychology background. There's just certain percentages of society that fit into group. Like 70-80% of the society is just going to go along to get along, usually following what the powers that be tell them, because they just want to live their lives. So it takes this rebel group to start off a new movement. Even think like the American Revolution, all these things. It was like a small group, and it balloons out eventually. It's like a virus. It infects people. But man, I just lost my train of thought.
And so but then we're seeing that with Bitcoin, where essentially like this new idea was introduced and it was completely different than what had come in the past.
Yeah. So like with the ETFs and stuff, we're to the point now where the percentage of the population that's going to actually jump into cryptos that would have gotten in before while it's still free and the Wild Wild West is in there. To get the rest of the people in, they're going to have the regulators tell them this is safe, this is okay. So like the Bitcoin ETF and those types of things will allow a lot more of the institutional type money held in 401ks that are going to go to crap unless something happens, because their whole system is like on shaky ground. It's going to allow them to kind of funnel into the cryptocurrency ecosystem, in my opinion. But they're not going to be able to control it through the derivatives and futures markets, because you can track where every Bitcoin is held. It's a public ledger. You can look up any wallet on the ledger and see how many Bitcoins are in it. So they can be trying to sell on this derivative markets here, But if people actually try to take possession, they can. But if that mechanism, they're like the exchanges stop, then people are going to realize that those are fake. They just can't control. We don't know where all the gold on the planet is. We don't know how much there is. We don't know who controls all of it. There's no way to know that. But Bitcoin is a known. It's the hardest money ever because it's a known entity. So it just can't. I don't think, in my opinion, it won't be on long term. It won't be able to be tracked. But I wanted to jump back to what you were talking about with the whole Reddit thing, because this ties in with Bitcoin and what I don't know if it's astrologically what happened, but we've entered the era of decentralization. And what you just talked about is the decentralization. Before, we had hedge funds or the Wall Street people that had their clubs and controlled the markets. And now a group of people on the internet can go in a chat room and disperse a message to a million people around the world and affect the markets the same way that these hedge funds used to do it. And they're betting against it. And all these people are like, you know what, screw you. We don't like the way you've been running things. So they broke the markets by short squeezing all these hedge funds and whatnot, just to be like, you know what, this is the power of the people. But it's also showing the power that returning the power to people. That's what my book's about. Finding your enlightenment. Find your personal power. We all have a power in this world, but we have to accept it and put it to use out there. And collectively we can. That's what, like, in my opinion, a lot of what's going on is this divide and conquer. Even the Bitcoin versus gold, like we were talking about, it's divide and conquer, because if we actually join together as people, they have to ask us what we want to do. Right now, they're telling us what to do. But if we take our power back, they will have to ask us. They will beg us to tell them what they want us to do, just so we accept it. So it's like, yeah, there's this whole movement, and but so we need them to regulate it, just because that's going to be their undoing. Like they have to welcome it in, so we can. It's like the Trojan horse.
Interesting. I want to talk more about that, because I've been thinking about writing a piece on essentially that the myth of regulatory clarity. I've been thinking, because we have lawyers who are like asking for regulatory clarity. However, there's so many regulations on the book already that I think that they can easily be applied to the Bitcoin and blockchain space for in all aspects. When you go in and you sell gold to a coin shop, you can sell $1 million worth of gold, and they can basically give you $1 million in cash. Okay, let me use a different number, 50,000. They can give you $50,000 in cash, and it's not reportable transaction. And then here we have the crypto people who are like, please give us regulatory clarity. And I think that there is regulatory clarity. So let's start there. There's a bunch of stuff you said that I want to chew on, everything from like competing civilizations to regulatory clarity. But let's start with that. Tell me more about the Trojan horse theory of Bitcoin and crypto.
Do you hold any crypto? Bitcoin? Do you transact?
I can neither confirm nor deny that.
Okay. It's just, for me, I wrote a piece once, and is that when you have a Bitcoin, say, and you're like, okay, I got to send it to this exchange, or I send it to this person, or send it to another party. And you go and you copy your address, you put it in there, and you're about to click send. If this is your first time, this is like, oh crap. There's this moment of clarity where you're like, what happens if this messes up? Because in our current society, we can complain to somebody. We can complain to the bank. We can complain to the store manager. My order was wrong. Give me my money back, and we can get it back. That's not the crypto world. You hit you one wrong letter in that thing, you send your money, it's gone forever. So it's like you take power back with money. There's this thing when it's like back in the day when church was big, and you had to go to church to talk to the priest so the priest could talk to God. And I'm like, now it's like, that's what, if you think about money, it's like we have to go to the bank so the bank can talk to the banking god to pass our money around. It's like we're cutting out that middleman and taking the responsibility back into yourself. So when you start doing that, people start to get it, like, oh wait, I don't have to hold my money in a bank. And I don't think, even me, part of me wants to hold some of my money in a bank somewhere where I'm like, if I die, at least my loved ones will easily be able to find that. I get that thing. I know I understand that part of it, but for most of it in my current life, I want to be able to control it. So when you start it's that first time you start sending transaction on any crypto network, and you realize that you're the one in control of it. You don't have to ask anybody for permission to send this, however, $1 million, like you were saying, across anywhere in the world that has an internet connection. it changes your thinking on the whole thing. It's a Trojan horse. It's like that. It's that what do they used to call marijuana? The gateway drug. It's the gateway currency into the crypto world. And then Bitcoin it's nice. It's secure. It's the most secure. It's not that fast though. I think a lot of people, especially the younger people, are going to need something faster, but it's the most secure. It's the gateway crypto. And yeah, it's a Trojan horse. And so we've got to get enough people to start doing that, to actually start using. And this is not talking about PayPal crypto or Robinhood crypto, because that's still, you got somebody holding it for you. We need people taking wallets into their own hand and pulling crypto into their own control, maybe losing a little bit on a scam or something, just to be like, oh man, I got to take responsibility for my life. But it's just because right now they're making everybody give responsibility to the government or the powers above them, because that's how they control us, by us giving them our power. So if we take it back by taking control of our money, taking control of I go to work and earn a little bit, it's value. That's what I want to control. My value earned, like time. So it's a gateway in that respect. It makes you have a different respect when you can send it anywhere you want in the world without anybody telling you what to do about it.
Why is the regulatory clarity a prerequisite for Bitcoin and crypto generally behaving as like a Trojan horse?
Because most people won't accept it unless the regulators tell them it's okay. That's just people. People do not want to run afoul of the power structure that can clearly control their lives, whether it's social media jail or real jail. They don't want to run afoul of that system. That's why it's amazing to know how many people do not agree with what's actually going on in America right now, but they don't say it because they're afraid to. And I know, because every once in a while I will actually say something, because I'm like I say I'm a ninja. I know I just stay hidden. I can be all that bad stuff, but I can hide inside of the system, because that's how you live longer. I ain't looking to die early, right? So it's like, but every once in a while I'm like, man, especially I don't know if I have like a beer, I'm like, man, screw this, I'm just gonna push it on Facebook. And the amount of like responses I get to it, just thumbs up from people, I'm like, I didn't even know you were my friend still. But they're like, yeah, I agree, but they don't say anything else. It's because people are afraid. They've made us think that the actual dominant opinions, they've made us think that we're not the dominant ones. We're in the minority, but we're not. It's a mind screw. Like if you even on my Twitter page, I call myself a sorcerer. I'm not joking about this. I'm deep into like spiritual. How am I here as a person? What is creating all this? There's some source back there. So I pull from that thing to create into my world. I am a sorcerer. I don't need anything outside of me to create in my world. But they've made it so everybody is dependent on outside sources and authority opinions, because that's the only way to control the power that we have.
I want to dig deeper into that, but let's take a step back. And you're talking, okay, so we've got, you're talking about decentralization, and we're in the age of decentralization. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was a foreign policy advisor and also, I believe, in the Jimmy Carter administration, and also a close ally of the Barack Obama administration, wrote a book called In Between Two Ages. And I think that like the notion was that we were kind of in between the industrial age and the technocratic age. And I would say that we have seen this hypothesis, which he printed in the 70s, come further to fruition. And I would paint a picture of what we're seeing today in this way. Like we've got three different civilizations that are all existing at one time. We've got the kind of the industrial age, or maybe you could just say the Western civilization. I would actually say probably more accurately, we've got Western civilization that's still around. However, then we've got these two other kind of civilizations that are forming as well in a parallel manner. The decentralized civilization, which in many ways actually borrows from the concepts and ideas that were really important to especially the post-Enlightenment era of Western civilization, perhaps dating back to Magna Carta as well. So that's the decentralized age or civilization that's forming. as well as a distributed civilization. And so you've got the big corporations who are experimenting with, quote, blockchain technology. However, it's not truly blockchain technology. It's distributed ledger technology. For some reason, it's been labeled as blockchain. It's quite confusing, that. And however, this is a third kind of civilization that we see forming. And this one is different from the decentralized insofar as the nodes are essentially big corporations and governments. And then the decentralized one is essentially a more anarchic distribution of the nodes. It's more just kind of like a decentralized, like there, you don't need permission in order to become a node in this new civilization. So both of those new civilizations are digital, I guess, in a way. That's one of their main characteristics, and the Western one is not. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a, when you talk about that, like, it's getting, you're pointing out the finer, but to me, like the old kingdoms, like the old kings, they've turned into the corporations. So you're kind of pointing to how this power structure over here morphs itself over time to kind of stay stay on top of and adapt with the times, but still be up there. And I don't think that's ever going to change. I don't know. There's certain aspects of our reality I just accept because it just seems like that's the way. There's always this, accepting duality on a certain level means that there's always going to be higher and lower, good or bad power structures. It's more of us as individuals to kind of become aware of what we can do inside of that and affect the system, in my opinion. But we are at the crux of two different civilizations. And as we mentioned at the outset, even just our ages, we have a unique perspective on it because we can kind of remember the world without the internet and what it was like. But we in our formative years growing up, when we were really learning the world, that's when the internet came into being. So we can really appreciate both of the worlds and kind of be the bridge in between the two. So one thing I don't think, even I don't, especially if you're so you're holding gold and silver or cryptos because you don't like the powers that be, you're going to have a little bit of opposition to the power structure. But we all kind of need to realize or accept one fact. As far as the internet's concerned, as soon as the internet was made, we became a global society. Everybody likes to talk about the new world order and one world. I'm like, as soon as the internet connected us to the world, we became a global society. That's a fact. You can dispute, you can argue against them, but you can't change the reality that we know what happens in China within a few minutes of it happening in China. We are connected, even on an energetic level. That changes how humans perceive the world. If we're the ones creating the world, so what comes in, we project this energy out, and together the collective energy projected out creates our reality. The fact that we know so much more about what's going on all around the world has already made us global. So we're on a progression towards having potentially a global society, a global government, a global currency, just because we are aware of each other. You know, it's up to each one of us to change our perspective on that, our perception on that, because for my 5 steps change: awareness, acceptance, intention, action, patience. I'm aware that this is going on. Can I accept it? Accept doesn't mean that you like agree with you. It just means that you like, I cognitively, my being notices that that's going on. And yes, because only from that point can I do actions to change it. So from that point, if I can't really change it, I can start to influence the world. I can talk to more people about gold and cryptos or be in both, but I can't do it unless I see this transaction or how that might help us get positioned as this world moves towards a one world currency or something. And just to me, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing on a long-term scale. I mean, if we really want to build a successful space exploration program, we want to go see other planets. It's not going to happen if half of us are fighting with the other half and blowing each other up. I mean, that's a poor waste of our energy as a species. So if we have these goals, if we are working as a goal, collective goal together, I think that will help change our whole like global society. And I think like one thing I was thinking about this. I'm like, what can I talk about with this guy? One thing I really want to talk about mention is like this concept I have of how Bitcoin can actually change how governments are interacting with each other. And this is just based on like game theory and like you want to get like woo-woo spiritual like frequencies. Like, so right now, all these different governments, countries are competing for different resources around the world, competing for the attention of the people and stuff. And here you have Bitcoin, which is this mined currency where you have to contribute computing power and energy towards creating it. And as it's grown over the last decade in prominence, all the way to where now El Salvador has accepted it, you had China mining most of it. And like, I clearly see coordination in the fact that like 1 week, Elon Musk is saying Bitcoin mining is bad for the environment. So a lot of the Bitcoin mining happens in China. 2 weeks later, China announces that they're banning Bitcoin mining because a lot of it is done with like coal. So like for me, like that shows actual level of coordination on the global scale. Like there's some force making sure that this happens as it's supposed to, because a lot of people are really upset about crypto or Bitcoin because of that. So the fact that China turns around and bans it when it's not really in their long-term interest makes it seem like there's some deeper motives there. But so you're going to have different ones. Some people theorize that the NSA is already mining Bitcoin. You're going to have different governments mining Bitcoin. So you're going to have different countries contributing, even Iran's mining Bitcoin, and the US and North Korea probably. So you're having countries that have that are currently enemies, as we're taught, doing the same, contributing towards the same goal of creating Bitcoin, creating a network of that can't be corrupted. To me, like even just like on a deep, unconscious spiritual level, if that happens long enough, it changes how everybody's interacting. It changes the frequency of the interaction, just because there is a shared goal we're all contributing towards. Even if it's like right now, Iran and the US, I'm just throwing stuff out. I don't believe this. They have 0% shared goals. If they start both mining Bitcoin, then say they have like 1% shared goal. That's a difference. Like when I used to be a therapist, and I tell somebody, we got to change this behavior. They're like, but I can't just do it. I'm like, so do it one day. Like if you need to work out for 2 minutes of your day, because that's 2 minutes longer than you worked out other days. And then you extend it out. Any behavior, just do it the little bit of change over time, incremental changes over time is how we actually affect big change. And to me, when all these governments and corporations and whatnot are going to be all contributing resources towards Bitcoin creation and usage, it's a shared goal that's not controlled. Like the US dollar is not controlled, it's controlled by the dollar, or the US. Bitcoin is not controlled by any one entity. So they're all contributing towards a shared goal that's not controlled by any one entity. And that, in my opinion, will change how we interact over time.
I wanted to push back on a couple of points. So the first one being that the US dollar is not controlled by the US, it's controlled by central banks, which actually leads me to my next point, is that you mentioned that like in order to go to space, et cetera, that perhaps a centralized order could be beneficial towards that. And I don't necessarily think that's true, actually. I would say that the reason why much of the conflict we see on the planet is actually arisen from a centralized force that's already global in nature. For instance, international corporations of today, kings and queens of yesterday, marrying each other, of course. I mean, so I would push back against that and say that extremely decentralized sovereign entities could actually coordinate and create bounty and send us to space. I don't want to go any further into that though, because there's so much to touch on. Now, let's so you mentioned about like how Bitcoin and the effect Bitcoin could have on nation states. So I wanted to read a piece that I wrote for news.bitcoin.com in 2017. It was an interview actually that I did with the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis Vice President, Dr. David Andalfado. He was optimistic about Bitcoin as an alternative currency and how it could impose limitations on the ability of governments to raise revenue through money creation. He spoke about this in the context of Venezuela. Quote, in some countries, the former professor says, the ability for a central bank to print money is a significant source of revenue for the government. It's not the case in the US or developed countries, but in underdeveloped countries where you don't have a well-developed tax system and still a relatively large fraction of the population living in the countryside, an alternative to collecting taxes is through the inflation tax, that is, to print money. Dr. Andalfado, who posts his thoughts on the Macromania blog, doesn't take a qualitative position on the inflation tax. Quote, if a government does it to build a hospital for sick children, it's arguably a good thing. If it does it for military hardware or for evil friends, it's probably bad. Either way, if a government finds itself fiscally constrained it's going to want to start printing money at a faster and faster rate, 10% in the first year, then 20% a year, 30%, and so on. At those rates, it becomes costly to hold cash because it's losing its purchasing power very rapidly. He goes on, what do people in high inflationary and hyperinflationary circumstances seek is an alternative or competing currencies. This could be the US dollar, gold, and things like that. Governments and central banks often then impose currency restrictions, maybe by implementing laws keeping people from opening USD denominated bank accounts. Bitcoin is not so easy. Quote, enter Bitcoin, where any kid with a phone and access to the internet can now access this alternative cryptocurrency, not under jurisdiction of any government, because it's accessible through the internet. The only way a government could really crack down on it is through draconian measures, essentially shutting down the internet in the country or confiscating everyone's personal devices. You can see how this competing currency might impose some sort of discipline on a central bank in the future if Bitcoin becomes more popular and is more widely used in, say, a country like Venezuela. This potentially precludes the ability of a central bank and government to overinflate the currency. You've always seen competing currencies emerge. The only difference is this one is digital and through the internet. To the extent that Bitcoin is available, to the extent Bitcoin has zero inflation, people are going to be asking themselves, why should I accept this Bolivar for my labor and goods when the Bolivar is depreciating at a quick rate? Why don't I just accept Bitcoin with my phone and payment address? In that matter, the population substitutes out the domestic currency, the Bolivar in this case, and starts to ignore it. It becomes valueless or is driven out of circulation and the economy switches to Bitcoin or some other substitute. He continues. A government's ability to acquire goods and services by printing money depends on people accepting money. If no one accepts bolivars and only Bitcoins, then the central bank and government are going to be out of luck. If central bank and government understand the threat of this currency substitution, they are not likely to increase the inflation rate. They will keep the inflation rate lower than it otherwise would have been and will be able to extract less inflation tax revenue because people could dump the bolivar and substitute it with Bitcoin. Central banks have been under threat of currency competition since the beginning of central banking history. Currency competition is arguably a good thing. It's been a good thing. There is nothing to prevent anyone from paying someone in pesos here in the US. The same is true for Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is a de facto foreign currency as far as central banks are concerned. And again, that was the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank Vice President, Dr. David Andelfado. And so he's really mirroring what you said in some ways. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it really comes down to how where people are paying attention to their surroundings, to the prices of stuff in their environment, and how knowledgeable of their access to something like Bitcoin they have. And this is going back to Gresham's law, good money versus bad money. The people it really goes back to what I was talking about. Like, it's not the money, it's how do we all get money? We get it by working. That's our life. So people start to realize, like, everything is costing me more of my life to get. Whilst, as you mentioned, you can print billions of dollars to build a hospital or to start a war. And right now it seems like they're a lot more focused on that war part of it, or the things that aren't necessarily benefiting the majority of people. So people are starting to question it. And it's just, to me, it's like, as a species, like if you ever watch herd animals or stuff, you can see how they all start to react to certain things that happen in their environment. We're all starting, we have a connection as humans, like our conscious level. It's starting to seep down into more and more people that, like, there's something wrong in our society and we need to do something about it. And it started in Venezuela, now it's in El Salvador, it's probably going to somewhere like Argentina and around the world, because like in the US, we've printed $6 trillion since COVID started. That's ridiculous. Like, what? How? What? But people, the mainstream media, like the news channel, repeats messages to them all day long that have nothing to do with the deeper things going on in our lives. And most of them kind of get sucked in. But at a certain point, when you go to work for 40 hours and you can barely feed yourself, you start to realize that there's a problem. And it doesn't matter how much the message that they're saying on screen it's going to start to conflict with your internal feelings. And that it's just taking a while for everybody else to kind of become aware of that and start to respond. But it's starting to happen now with people that like Bitcoin or crypto, gold and silver have been saying this for a long time. And we're finally, it's finally starting to seep down into people's like recollect or awareness. But I don't know like what we can do next about it. Like it's funny that it's a Fed president, a vice president saying that, because they do a lot of conflicting things. They say something like that and then they turn around and do something else. And they don't like jump back against the president of the Fed when there's like all these younger ones at a lower level. They're like, nah, that's BS. And it's like, I don't
Well,
get
that's
how
why
people,
that line of thinking and reasoning might be why he's never like the Fed chairman, for instance. He's not
yeah,
going to like see the same sort of career progress that somebody who maybe is a monetarist
even
would
what's her,
see.
the one that Trump had nominated. Oh, I don't know. I'm blanking on her name right now, but she was more into
Yellen,
gold. Yeah, no, the one that was
the new one.
no, the one Trump had nominated her to be on the Fed chair, I think, but she was more of a gold.
Yeah, I remember.
But yeah. Now we can't even remember. That's how much they like pushed her name, her whole idea out of our mind. It's like, don't think about that. So like, but this is just to me, typical human behavior. Like people, any position of power, I don't care if it's a teacher or it's a president or a dictator or it's a central bank, you don't want to lose that power. You fight it. You do whatever you can to not, whether it's printing a bunch of money or making new rules that limit people to question your authority. But on the long time scale, it kind of gets overpowered by just the sheer will of conscious people choosing a different path. But we all have to kind of choose that path. So I know we just try to speak to enough people. I think now I'm happy that it's a lot easier to have these conversations with my friends and stuff. They're actually starting to be like, before they're like, what's fiat? And now they're like, Jordan, my dollars are losing their value. What crypto do you recommend? And I'm like, welcome to the game. And it's going to keep going. Like you said, we were talking about before, we got an interesting 10, 20 years ahead of us, man. What happened? Like 2018, 1918, Spanish flu, 2022, like mini depression, 2029, big depression. I'm like, yo, people, it don't happen quick. Yeah.
Mhm.
And we're all connected on a global scale more now. This is gonna be like, just the emotional response to what's gonna happen is gonna be, I don't know, how many people were alive in 1920, like a billion, maybe 1.5. It's gonna be like 7 times more.
With real-time data.
Yeah. And I know the US doesn't control, it's the banks, the private banks that are told, they say we're federal, but they're privates that make rules for their own self. It's really, I'm like, damn, these people are good.
So I want to talk a little bit about, well, how much time do you have actually? Because I want to talk about your book, but I wanted to finish up a little bit on the financial side of things.
I'm good. My afternoon is pretty open, man.
All right. So let's just conclude on the finance side of things. I pulled up a couple articles and then let's talk about your book for like however long, maybe like 20 minutes longer. So I pulled up this article in Bloomberg. We started this talk with what pressures, or one of our early topics was what pressures are influencing the Bitcoin price. And so I pulled up a couple articles. This one's in Bloomberg Opinion. What Germans think about inflation is wrong. Germans are known for angst in general and angst about inflation in particular. After all, hyperinflation during the Weimar Republic led to the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. Bloomberg said it. The collective memory has been cited countless times, both inside and outside Germany, as a psychological explanation for the country's hawkish monetary culture and the long-standing attacks by German conservatives against the European Central Bank for its easy money policy. Now inflation is rising again to about 3% this year in the country, well ahead of the Euro area's rate and the 2% target of the ECB. Germans are not hysterical yet, but you can expect to hear about the specter of Weimar again before long. Enter Lucas Hafert, Nils Rediker, and Tobias Rommel. Researchers at the University of Zurich, they're here to explain that inflation doesn't actually exist. The Hertie School of Governance in Berlin and the Technical University of Munich, respectively. They published a study showing that the German narrative linking hyperinflation to the rise of the Third Reich is just plain false. So now I think the point about this in general is that the discussion of inflation and even hyperinflation and even the specter of authoritarianism as a result thereof is creeping back into the popular kind of consciousness. And I think that's going to be a very big pressure on the Bitcoin price moving forward. You mentioned El Salvador. I think that, of course, is a big pressure, especially in September. But I think there's going to be even bigger pressures on the Bitcoin price. And it's going to be the headlines of rising food prices, gas prices, and then manufacturing prices. And then furthermore, even people will start noticing this slow transformation from a selection-based economy to an availability-based economy. And I've already seen that here. I've had issues getting spring water on certain trips to the market. I've had issues getting meat in certain cases, paper products in certain cases. And in fact, when I leave the store now, I plan on going to possibly 2 stores in order to get everything. That is a clear-cut sign that we're contracting while we're printing money, which is going to lead to a further increase in the price of goods. And this is going to be one of the main pressures on Bitcoin for the remaining future. You mentioned 10 years at least.
You say positive pressure or negative pressure, or just pressure?
It'll be positive pressure. Like people will seek out, the people will learn about deflationary mediums of exchange. To learn about this concept of inflation and deflation, and the fact that we've got deflationary value out there will, as Andal Fado noted, be an alternative.
Yeah, I think there's definitely different factors going into a lot of what you talked about. The inflation is clear, it's obvious, and people will eventually start to seek out better money. It cost me $1,000 to buy that this week, or it cost 0.001 Bitcoin. Then next week it cost me $5,000, or it cost me 0.001 Bitcoin. Which one should I choose? People are going to clearly see that over time. But I think a lot of what's going on too, America, have you seen the Hunger Games?
Yes.
We're the capital, man. We're the capital. We have been the capital for decades now, and the good times are over. So a lot of like our selection society before, that was us living off like the glut of the empire. And like as they're like,
we were being humored.
Yeah, we were being humored. But America started printing $6 trillion at the beginning of COVID, and the rest of the world's like, no, we ain't sending you our stuff for that money anymore. So part of it's that, and there is definitely, I think the whole supply chain system everything became way too centralized and dependent on every other part around it. And I think we all got a like, oh crap moment when COVID came around, like this needs to reorganize and reshift. And I think that's just going to take years to do. And eventually manufacturing and stuff will be brought back to the US just because out of necessity. So I think that's it. But that, like we're saying, this is going to be a rough 10 years because that's part of this process. Like the world got out of whack over the last 30 years, whereas like sending all manufacturing to China, like the world's manufacturing in China, talk about centralization, right? So like the world's kind of like, oh crap, and nothing here happens as fast as we'd like it to. So this unraveling of the buildup of problems that we've got is going to take time to unfold. So I think that plays a lot into like the supply chain aspect of it. But going back to when I was studying environmental health and stuff, I've seen, and now I've done so many different charts I've looked at, commodities charts, Bitcoin, cryptos, and all this stuff. And I'm like, man, they all do the same pattern eventually. There's one chart that hasn't, the human population chart. That bad boy's been like going parabolic for a while now. And just statistically speaking, from like I'm not going to be empathic or emotional about any of it. Just as if I was a trader and I had to pull out my THR, I'm like, that's got to have a correction. So we're seeing that. Well, and that's why, like, when I get into like the deeper spiritual aspect
I
of
think he
what
just
we,
came up with the next DeFi app, like how to like bet on the human pop.
yeah, I bet you people are already doing that, man. Like, yeah, we're seeing. I like to tell people COVID's happening. But people like to get conspiratorial about it. Are they trying to depopulate the planet, or is it? I'm like, it doesn't matter. In my perspective, something was going to come along to do this because the chart of the human population was telling me that there was a correction coming. So it just, in the nature of this dualistic reality we find ourselves in, I'm saying something was going to happen to cause something to this pullback. And what we're seeing that in our population statistically has gotten a lot top heavy, older, a lot more older people, a lot fewer younger people. So the older people are retiring, not making as much stuff, especially COVID coming around. People are like, I'm 65, I'm retiring, I'm out of this game. So all these people that used to make stuff and do all these different jobs are starting to retire, leave the field. There has been a certain percentage of the population that was incentivized to not work. That's just human nature as well. We'll all take the easy route if we can, not all of us, but a lot of us will take the easy route if possible. And now we're kind of seeing the ramifications of because we are the capital, we've gotten a little lazy as Americans and we don't really value hard work for a lot of us, I would say. And now we're not just gonna be able to demand all of our stuff like within a day, like we used to be able to, and it's gonna take a little bit more work. And that's gonna, for me, that's a good thing for us. That'll make us grow as a people, grow spiritually, consciously. If there's gonna be some of the weaker folk that just ain't gonna make the trip, and they're gonna exit, and that's just how it goes. That's the way the human population has always gone. We just need to have a little bit more of a macro view of what's going on and not be so focused on our minute lives.
I want to talk a little bit about your book. Jordan, tell us a little bit about Manual for the Soul, a beginner's guide, Awaken Your Enlightenment in Millennium 2.1. Awaken to your enlightenment in Millennium 2.1.
Yeah, so it was my approach to try and tell people that the teacher, the guru, whatever it is that we're all looking for has been inside of us our whole lives. And a lot of people might think it's just memory, but like go back to your very first, what's the earliest memory you can remember?
I've always had trouble identifying which ones are earliest. And so if I had to like back, I mean, I'm thinking like maybe an earthquake when I was like a toddler or yeah.
So it was a big, like an impactful thing.
Mhm.
But yeah, and so like, can you remember other ones? Like, what was different? Why do you remember those things? What was going on there? Like, if you say earthquake, that's like,
So like what was going on in like life at that point?
for you, why do you remember that versus like the other things that happened to you up to that point?
Um Probably because it was so I guess impactful and not terribly negative either. I
Hmm.
think it was just not a huge earthquake. Things were just
Yeah.
shaking.
So a lot of times it's these impactful things that happen to us, or even just it can be like one of mine was I remember being in preschool age and being next to a pool, and there was a blow up alligator, but in my mind it was real and I was scared. And then I just a little blip, but like when you start to like look back on
Yeah, so
early
now
memories,
I remember in preschool like digging holes.
yeah, why like what's the difference? What was going on with you? Is your soul like, hey, I'm here now?
Actually, I think so. I was digging holes, and like everyone else was like chasing the girls. I guess that was like a game. Is you just chase the girls around in circles? I'm pretty sure that
Hmm.
was happening. And I think I must have just like I was different. I was different because I was digging a hole. I was just
Yeah.
digging a hole, and they were chasing the girls around.
Hmm.
I don't know why it was significant. I just remember I think maybe I was with someone else, I think a young girl, and we were just digging holes while everyone else was just running around chasing each other like mad people.
Hmm. Yeah, so like in the book, I kind of walk through a process of like looking at especially some of these early, more impactful memories and realizing like that's you breaking through and actually like coming aware in your world, seeing the world, and then kind of get pulled back in because it will jump ahead to another memory and stuff. But it's like really impactful points in our lives are we become really consciously aware. We become like ingrained, present, and then it actually sticks with our memory. A lot of times we think it's our memory, but I'm like, it's our enlightenment. We're here to, everybody, everything is thrust into like existence. We don't know how it's all created. We like to like, there's higher levels, religious laws and stuff, but I'm like, hey, we're a conscious being thrust into a place that we don't know how we got here. We're given senses to navigate and survive. Basic, first and foremost, everything we do as humans is for our survival. Because A, how did we get here? I don't know. B, what happens when we leave? So walking through, realizing that you're the one that's in your soul, you have this enlightenment journey that you're on, that nobody's ever going to be able to tell you what it is, but it's something that you discover, and it's a power that lies within you that helps you shape the world, change the world, and it, like all those magical things that we've all learned about are possible, but it doesn't come from a place of being present out there. You have to be present in here. You were in here looking out. You were in here digging a hole. You weren't wondering why you weren't thinking about those kids chasing other girls. You're like, I'm digging a hole. Why are they doing it? I'm digging a hole. You didn't even want to think about that. So that this process of walking through life, kind of reviewing memories. At the end of every chapter, I kind of give steps to kind of work, like it's a workshop kind of a thing, to things to think about and ponder on to help reframe, because like our memory is what makes our reality. Our experiences, everything, our perception, which is usually based on a lot of our memories, makes our reality. You can change your memories. You can change your perceptions. You can change, it's all a voice in your head, but you have to realize all the way back when that kid was digging that hole, that there's always been this voice in my head that's kind of been talking about what's going on in my reality. And I walked through later on, you realize like now there's like thousands of voices, and people that don't learn to control the voices in their heads can't do anything really in the world. Like one example is like, say you go to a restaurant and you're like really hungry and you ask the hostess, you're like, I want to eat right now. It's different now in the world, right? Anyways, you go to the hostess like, okay, you can go to the bar and eat. It's just an uncomfortable bar chair, but you can get served right now. But there's a booth back there. Those people are going to be leaving in about 5 minutes. I can get it clean for you. So, and then you can get over there probably in about 10 minutes. So it's going to take a little longer. So right there, and you're presented with a choice, and these two voices pop up. One voice is like, I want food right now. And the other voice is like, I want to eat in comfort. And they start battling in your head. And I'm like, which one are you? Who are you in that? We're not either one of these voices. We're not any of the voices. We're the thing listening to all the voices that ultimately decides. But most people, that's like a higher level up. Most people are stuck up in the voice level. They identify with each of these little voices. When somebody out in the other world disagrees with one of their voices, they like, oh man, don't poke the woke beast, right? So like, we have to kind of learn to quiet down all the voices and become the governor, the manager, the one in charge of the voices, the one that has always been in charge of the voices. But you have to be aware that that's going on. You have to accept that you can have that. You can take that responsibility, action. You have to, I intend to do this. I'm going to put steps, or intention, action, patience. I intend to be more consciously aware. I intend to be in control of my surroundings. And the really funny thing about this place is if you just intend it, say it out loud, we're like magnets and we attract. It's that we're putting an energy out and it attracts it back to us. So we intend it out and it comes back. But right now, most people are being the kid, you, before you had that realization that you were digging the hole, or the one afterwards where you just kind of went back and I don't remember anything after that. What happened for a while? I don't know. Most people are in that middle, the automation, the unaware place, just kind of going through life. But when we can step into just a simple, I'm aware, I'm conscious. There's just a boop, little change that transforms and gives you your power back, because everything that comes in, you get to choose how you want to respond to that thing. If somebody calls me the N-word, I can be like, wow, and I can send out all this bad energy, bad, good. I can send out a certain kind of anger energy into the world, or I can go like, man, you're clearly confused. I'm like, what's that word? There's a whole, and the energy that comes off of me in my response creates a different world than the world of me being angry. So it's like we walk around like, oh man, Trump was really a good example of showing this. Like he says something, and everybody's like, blah, 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 Trump made me mad. I'm like, no, how does he have that much control over your life? He said something, you chose to get mad and responded that way. You chose it. We all choose everything in our lives, but we have to stop putting that power on other people, saying that person made me do this. You're making me angry. You're making me this, and be like, I got angry because that happened. At least you're taking responsibility, but that's your enlightenment. Our enlightenment is the power that we have to take our energy and push it outwards, give our power to other people, or accept responsibility for our lives. So it's kind of a process about that.
I pulled up a quote by Carl Jung in 1921 who wrote concerning the self, but inasmuch as the I is only the center of my field of consciousness, it is not identical with the totality of my psyche, being merely one complex among other complexes. I therefore distinguish between the I and the self. So like I as in I, just me.
Yeah.
Since the I is only the subject of my consciousness, while the self is the subject of my total psyche, which also includes the unconscious. Jung described the process of individuation as self-becoming and self-realization. Jung defined the self as the archetype of order and noted that representations of self were indistinguishable from God images. What are your thoughts on that? And generally,
Yeah, that like it's funny when I start now, because I started meditating when I was 21. No, I took a psychology of stress class, probably when I was like 20. Graduated, yeah, about 21. Started meditating and been on a journey since then. And I obviously wrote a book, but I started to realize, and I read other people that have written spiritual books. I'm like, we're all trying to say the same. We're all trying to describe the similar experience that we've had based on this journey. And it is like, again, we don't know how we got here. When you can get away from the I, the ego, the eyes, you start to realize you're a part. The conscious self is a part of a greater whole. So it becomes much more difficult to distinguish yourself from God, because but you don't go around like the real, they don't, you can say I'm God, but I'm not the God. I'm a piece of God. I accept that the thing that made me was God. So I am not God. I am a piece of it. So you can technically say, yeah, I'm God, but you get into like, you need to go to a psych ward where you're like, I'm God of the universe, Jesus Christ reincarnated, and I will save the world. It's like, okay, that might be true. I mean, if that person existed before, it's possible that they'll come back, right? But I've met a lot of Jesuses when I worked in psych wards. So like we can get some messages can kind of get mixed up. We can break our system or break our brain with drugs. And sometimes, like I would say, on a long enough time scale in an infinite world, everything will happen. So if every person's journey, that person that you see on the street doing heroin, just sitting there, or a president or somebody at in charge of a big company, those are all experiences for God. None of them are bad or good. They are in the infinite of all. Why wouldn't they all happen? Why would the thing that is experiencing everything choose to not have certain experiences if it's not defining them as good or bad? It's just like different. So yeah, comes down to a lot of that. I don't know.
I saw a quote recently that I guess a 1 in 8 million chance happens every day in New York, where there's 8 million people.
Yeah. Statistically speaking, everything is going to happen. Everything will happen. I'm trying to, like, my book is trying to teach people that you can actually have a say in how those things happen. You can make certain things happen. Like you can't you can't do magic per se. You can't do all these fantastic things without realizing there's a piece of God in you that enables you to do that. And that's a loaded word. I didn't define my definition of God, but everybody has a different one. And just using that in a lot of conversation can be the wrong word to use because people have such a negative connotation to it. But just the
Look,
totality of experience.
let's just call them what they are. Atheists. Those people who define themselves by what they do not believe. It's a half-baked philosophy. So like,
But again, just realize and accept that we live in a duality. If there are people that accept their spirituality, the only way that can happen is if the opposite is true. And if the opposite is true, I guarantee you God's going to fill that space up too. Like I like the Hindu way of looking at it. It's like they accept that we're all God, right? So when they see, especially like hardcore Christians or atheists, and they're like, they accept that we're God here, that we came here as God to forget that we're God. So when they see people like atheists, they're like, bravo, like, damn, you're doing it good, God. Like, it's, imagine being that thing and completely trying to come from the opposite perspective. That's a challenging life path, man. And if I gonna remember a conscious life of infinite years, I'll have a go with that once, maybe, just to see what it's like. So again, this is how we as individuals can see the world, and instead of like bad or like having our opinion about it, just being like, I accept you because that allows me to accept me.
we've had the honor today of speaking with Jordan Finneseth. He's the author of Manual for the Soul, a Beginner's Guide, Awaken to Your Enlightenment in Millennium 2.1. He's also a writer at Cointelegraph. So thank you so much, Jordan, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Justin.